And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with Sir Charles Shults III. Sir Charles, outside of Earth, what do you think is the most fascinating planet in the solar system? Is it Mars?
It has been for me for a long time, but I would have to point to a moon of Jupiter, actually, and that would be Ganymede, because in my estimation, its internals probably have an ocean of salty water, and we would look there for marine life in abundance below the ice. That, to me, would be fascinating.
What about Europa?
Europa is also a very good choice. The two of them have environments that probably have shared material. One of the most interesting things to discover is if life is on either or both of them, if it's related, because their gravity is so weak, like 1 to 3% of what the Earth has, that an impact on one could splatter material to the other and seed it. So it would be interesting to see if two moons inside the same planetary system could seed each other with life.
Wouldn't it be amazing? We're finding exoplanets like crazy, but God, would it be great to find a planet like Earth somewhere?
Well, it absolutely would, and if we can see oxygen in the atmosphere, that's a great sign. Finding organic molecules is a good start. And, with our spectral abilities now, they're beginning to grow to the point where we can find things like that. And you mentioned AI in astronomy earlier. The fact is we've got programs that analyze that data now and find things that just would have slipped through your hands otherwise. So we're getting much more data out of the pictures, out of the spectral data, and finding the exoplanets. They basically do transits. They look for a planet moving in front of the star and dimming it slightly, and that's one of the most successful ways to do it. But in doing that, you can also analyze the atmosphere.
Have a great time with our listeners as they are calling you now, Sir Charles. Let's go west of the Rockies. Scott is with us in Costa Mesa, California. Hello, Scotty.
Hey, y'all.
Welcome.
Well, I've got some comments for Sir Charles, and you touched on this briefly, but the things that lie in wait. I remember back when the Exxon Valdez spill, and microbes were actually discovered under stones along the coast that were actually starting to eat the oil along the coast.
That's right.
Those weren't known to man. And then after Mount St. Helens eruption, among the eruption path shortly after things sort of settled down a bit, new plants emerged thought to be extinct. And so, again, those things, you touched on it briefly, but I just am incredibly leery of bringing otherworldly medium back home to, quote-unquote, us to study.
Absolutely.
As you are too, Charles. Go ahead.
Yeah, it would be the greatest threat that we would face, and you never know. Things re-enter uncontrolled, thing plunks into the ocean, and in a few days it's corroded open, and then what? I think about that thing in Revelations. It says the burning lantern called wormwood falls into the oceans and turns a third of them to blood. And I'm thinking, wow, that sounds almost on target, But the thing about the bacteria eating oil, actually that was known for many years previously. There was a researcher by the name of Thomas Gold who was at Cornell University, and he had a book.
He's the abiotic oil guy, right?
Exactly, and he's absolutely right. He wrote a book called The Deep Hot Biosphere, in which he found this foul-smelling slime would come up with drill holes where you were near petroleum, because these bacteria live deep underground, miles down, and they were digesting the petroleum, and that's how you knew you were getting close. So it's something they've known for many years, but it wasn't actually put into practice until that spill.
You would think that all the organisms in the solar system could be the same, Sir Charles, don't you?
No, I would say not. I would say that genetically and chemically they could be wildly different. But what I would say is while mutations are random, the environment you live in shapes you. And so we'll get a lot of very similar forms on any planet throughout the galaxy because the environments in which they live are the things that shape them. Their needs are chemical and energetic, but the environment shapes them. You don't see any cubic birds because they wouldn't be able to fly, So they're shaped by their needs.
Let's go to Ted, truck driving in Texas, on the wild card line. Hey, Ted. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, George. Hey, I'd like to ask your guest that you say you're seeing echinoderms. I wish I could see the photos. Now, here on Earth, they eat brown algae like giant kelp, Macrocystis pyrifera, or bull kelp, Nereocystis pyrifera. Do you suspect that there was kelp growing on Mars at one point?
I would have to say that there had to be some sort of marine plants, and it's a very simple leap to that because any biosphere that supports animal life has to have something to produce their energetic intake gas. And plants are much simpler in structure and function than an animal. They have more complex genes, but yes, we do have some fossil-looking, what looks like a bed of fossil leaves from very early on in the Opportunity images that were found, I think, around Salt 38 or so in Eagle Crater. We do not have anything other than what looks like mud-coated leaves, but I would strongly suspect that any biosphere would have to have both plant and animal and other sorts of forms in order to make it work.
Ted, when you get to where you're going, take a look at our website. You can look at those pictures. They'll be up there for about a day or so. They are fantastic, to be sure. What about the possibility of ancient fish life on Mars, Sir Charles?
Well, I did find a couple of things that looked very much like shark's teeth, but I think that they are, but I can't be absolutely certain. You see, the bulk of the material I've found has been trilobites, urchins, crinoids, some sand dollars, that sort of stuff. So I'm not going to go too far out on a limb. I mean, I see it, but I want to find things that other people can see and the chemical analysis supports and the physical analysis supports, because the case I'm making for many people seems to be outrageous, and yet it's absolutely factual.
Where'd the water go?
Well, the planet is in an ice age right now. Now, understand, with a weak gravity field and no way to replace an ocean because there's no volcanism to speak of right now, a lot of the water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen, and the hydrogen will blow off into space eventually, and so it goes away, But a lot of it is still on the planet in the form of glaciers, and some of it's only under a couple of inches of dirt. Remember, the Phoenix Lander at the North Polar region landed, and like an inch or two below the dirt, they were on a sheet of ice. And a lot of impacts kick ice up. So we know the oceans are still there in the form of ice, and, some's at the poles, and a lot of it is covered by desert dust and sand.
How far down can water seep if it goes all the way down?
Well, actually, water comes from the inside of a terrestrial planet and comes out. And we have a water table on Earth because the water does cycle. But the water is formed, it's not carried to planets from asteroids or comets. It's actually formed inside planets when, the magma is operating on the volatile molecules that are incorporated. So, and we know that because the fingerprints, the isotopes, are wrong for the water to have been brought from space. It doesn't match.
East of the Rockies, Brian's with us in Indiana. Hello, our friend. Go ahead.
Hey, George, good morning. How are you?
Good. Looking forward to Columbus. It's coming up.
Oh, man. Oh, it's coming up fast, too. And listen, man, people that are coming, bring your best costume because the winner will be handsomely rewarded. And we're gonna have spotters out in the audience, but nobody knows who they are. So come dressed to win. Sir Charles, I got a couple of quick questions, and I'll take my answers off the air. One's about methane on Mars. Now, there's been discussions and disagreements on why it's there and what's causing it. And I just want your opinion on why do you think it's there and what's causing it, and why the rover Curiosity has found different spikes, different times, in different areas. Just wonder what causes that. And the other question is about radiation.
Sure.
Do you think that they'll ever be able to overcome the difficulties of radiation and living on Mars? And, George, I'll see you in Columbus.
Coming up.
Yeah.
You got it.
Absolutely. So, number one, I'll answer the radiation one first because it's actually pretty simple. You always see these pictures of Mars cities as domes or, buildings on the surface. That makes absolutely no sense. You would dig underground, and you do it for thermal and radiation protection, and that would be the end of it. There are actually places on Earth that are more radioactive than the surface of Mars, and life seems to thrive just fine. So there's always a way to get around it. Shielding, number one, that will do it for you, and that's a pretty straightforward answer. Number two, the methane question. There are two specific sources of methane on Earth, and we'd expect the same would be true on Mars. One is geological. Methane was present when the planets formed, And so some of it is leaking out of the planet all the time, natural gas. But some of it was polymerized by heat and pressure and made petroleum. And some of it is coming from bacterial action. So on Mars, we would expect that the same thing would be true. Some methane will leak out of the planet from geological sources and some from bacteriological sources. And, again, that goes right back to Gil Levint's findings of microbes in the soil. Many of them could probably survive on methane or produce methane in the course of their metabolism. And I would say that would be the two things. You find different spikes in different areas because the amount of moisture, the amount of heat, all of those things change from place to place.
Next up, Ron in Tennessee. Welcome to the program. Hi, Ron.
What an honor to be on with Sir Charles. I had a question.
Okay.
Could evolution and creation be combined?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I heard something years ago, and it was this. If somebody thinks that religion and science are in opposition,
they're not.
They don't understand either one of them.
They work together.
Well, if you think about it, if you're a technically minded person and you believe in God, and I certainly do, then you have to admit that putting it in motion in such a way that the physics controls all of it is an astounding and elegant way to do it. And we know that evolution works because, I use it all the time in developing software algorithms and AI work. So evolution is not a mystery. We see that it works. But it doesn't hurt to appreciate that God himself could put evolution in action and use it as a tool. What would you do if you were creating a world?
Do you remember the first image you saw on Mars that was one of those aha moments for you?
Oh, absolutely. It was early on. It was like Sol number 9, and it was very early on, and it was only a few days after that we found what appeared to be tiny seashells, and broken shells have alternating chambers that get larger back and forth. And that was the big aha. And it was on February 15th of 2004 that I was absolutely certain, that early in the mission. And, buddy, it's been an uphill battle since then, but I have found so many things. I have no doubt that very, very soon they're going to have to confront the issue. Even Dr. Gil Levin said to me, your findings support my work strongly. And he sent me all sorts of material. And that, to me, really gave me the impetus to continue.
What do you think of the Cydonia region and that face on Mars?
I've analyzed it, and what I see is it's one of the glaciers that's under the soil, and as the glacier melts away, it produces those sloped sides. I would not be surprised if what we're really looking at is subsurface ice melting away, producing that specific sort of form.
Would you be surprised if it was a real face?
Yes, I would be. I would be very surprised. If you look at the new, sharper images they've gotten from the closer orbiters with better telescopes, it doesn't even look like a face anymore.
We're taking your calls this hour with Sir Charles Shults III. A couple little wildcard lines have just opened up. I'll let you know that. Brian in the state of Washington, welcome to the show. Hey, Brian, go ahead.
Hey, George. Hi, Sir Charles.
Hi.
Hi.
My question, I'm just amazed at all your knowledge that you have. So my little research, it's hard to believe Mars is 235 million miles away from planet Earth. But my question
141 from the sun, 141 million from the sun, yes.
Oh, okay, that was a little off. And my question is, who was the first person on this Earth that decided, let's go for Mars, and this is the planet that we need to search for? That's my question.
Well, that is an interesting question. I don't know who the first person was, but I do know that people theorized that beings could be on all of the worlds at one point, and that goes all the way back to the work of Cardinal Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake for saying there was a multiplicity of worlds by the Catholic Church. However, people have theorized about Mars for a long time, and I know that the work of Percival Lowell, he felt that there were canals on the planet that had been built by a dying civilization. But, anywhere that you can see somebody's going to want to go there. And I couldn't name who the first person was, but I know that there's a long history of people wanting to explore the moon, the Mars, Mars and the other planets.
There are some thoughts, Sir Charles, that the Martians are us, that as their planet was dying, they decided we better go to the neighbor planet fast, and here they come.
Well, I would say that's not really likely, and here's the reason. I see no evidence of anything more than marine life, and we know that the atmosphere would have been incredibly thin. You'd have to go back over 2 billion years to have enough pressure for you to be able to walk around with just a gas mask on. There would have been nothing intelligent in any of that period of time. And we don't see any signs of intelligence. Everything looks like just simple organisms trapped in the oceans. That was the real atmosphere of the planet. Surrogate atmosphere was the oceans, the water. We would be able to say for sure if we did have biological samples, and that would answer the question of whether there's any relationship. I suspect that there is not, but that's just an opinion, to be honest.
West of the Rockies, Tom's with us in Riverside, California. Hi, Tom.
Hello, George. Hi, Sir Charles. I wanted to ask kind of a simple question, I guess. The planets are all perfectly marbles. They're perfectly round when you look at them from a distance, of course. And all the bodies seem to be that way. Are they that way? Are the planets all out around these stars that we're finding? Are they all marbles? And why is that? And why do the planets turn? They spin on their axis, and also they orbit around the sun for gravity. But and then also, I'd like to know something about one of George's questions. Is oil come from inside? You kind of hinted that it did from the planet itself. It's always regenerating, or does it come from plant, decay, and also gold? Where's the origin of that?
Okay. I'll start with the oil question first. First of all, we know that when the planets formed, there was a lot of methane in our solar system, and a lot of that got trapped inside the material as the planets were accreting. They were building up from these chunks and pieces. And that material has been heated by the core. It is chemistry in magma. And what happens is methane gets polymerized together and becomes higher order molecules and releases hydrogen in the process. And the hydrogen literally forms water by stealing oxygen from some of the minerals. So the minerals give up the oxygen, the methane gives up the hydrogen, and the result is petroleum and water. And that's just a real short synopsis. And it's oozing out from the mantle. And if you pump out a hole of petroleum, it does refill from the bottom slowly. And next, the size and shape of the planets. We know why the planets are round. It's because when they formed, they were molten, and the material sags downhill. Well, downhill for a planet is toward the core. So planets are pretty much very round. Now, you're going to find some exceptions. The Earth has been clobbered by a huge, nearly Mars-sized planet billions of years ago, and people call it Orpheus. And there's a lopsided core inside our planet as a result.
Hold on, Sir Charles. We're at a break. We'll come back and finish up that statement. I'll ask you about where gold comes from, and then we'll take final calls. And welcome back. George Norrie here with Sir Charles Shults III, back with our final set of questions. Sir Charles, I'll let you finish off what you were talking about Earth orbits and planet orbits, and then we'll ask you how gold is formed.
Yeah, okay, so anyway, when the cloud of dust and gas that a solar system is formed from comes together, it always has a rotation. And that rotation is carried to all of the pieces within it, the star, the planets, and everything. And that's why they spin basically in the same direction and orbit in the same plane. So that's just conservation of angular momentum. Dust and gas actually have a lot of movement when they're that size of a light year across. And gold. It is stated recently that the collisions or interactions of neutron stars may be responsible for producing the gold that we have. And it wouldn't be 100% of it, but it would be most of it. And that seems reasonable considering how much energy it would take to produce it.
That is amazing. Do you think other planets have gold?
Oh, absolutely. we can find samples of it in meteorites even.
Yeah. Interesting take. Back to the calls. Eric in Indianapolis. Hello, Eric.
Hello, George. Great guest, and hi, Sir Charles. How are you tonight?
Doing great.
Just wanted to ask, you probably have already answered my questions anyway, but just wondering, has anybody ever discovered that there is anything precious of a value to us here on Earth on the other planets, like, say the moon or whatever planet they've ever,
metals, minerals, gems, that sort of stuff?
I think the most precious thing on this planet, Sir Charles, is us.
I would say so, but we can be a two-edged sword. That's the problem. But as far as it goes, there have been even asteroids discovered with large amounts of platinum group metals, and it would behoove us, if that's what we need, to go out there and mine it, because it's there for the taking, to be honest.
Absolutely. Eric, thanks for your call. Let's go next to JJ in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hello, JJ.
Hi, George. Hello, Sir Charles.
Welcome.
Thank you. I have a fascination ever since I've read a sci-fi novel about this idea of a space tether where, I don't know the science or physics of how it would work or why we haven't done it yet, but I imagine like launching a giant spool of thread or something similar into space and then slowly unwinding it till the bottom of it reaches the Earth, and then we have a huge anchor that's held in space by centrifugal force of the Earth. Is that possible? Could we do it on a larger scale to where we could maybe transport items or even, like you said, the solar electricity back down to Earth, anything like that? And I'll take my answers off the air.
Fantastic. And the answer is yes. They did some early experiments with tethers that had a couple of wires in them on the space shuttle, and they found that these wires cutting through the magnetic field of the Earth actually generated an immense amount of power. And if you did it in reverse, by running power through the tether, you could actually push a space station up higher by working off of the magnetic field slightly. And running a tether from space to the ground is called a skyhook or a space elevator. And the one thing that's kept us from doing that is its center of mass would have to be 22,300 miles above the equator, and it would have to be made of a material that is pretty unreasonably strong. We're just getting near making something stronger than diamond fibers that would be able to support the load. And one of the tricks would be to taper it so it's thicker at the top and thinner at the bottom. Building such a device could make space travel really easy by literally running an elevator up and down the ribbon. So that is a real concept, and it's something that we might be getting close to being able to test. We already have materials that could do it, for instance, on the moon from a strength perspective, but not from the Earth.
Cairo in Arabic means Mars. Don't you find that fascinating?
I find that amazing. Mars has had about 50 names, and we had a Mars show that used to run at the planetarium down in Orlando where Patrick Stewart himself narrated about 50 of these different names like Nergal and Ares.
Wow.
So it's amazing.
Let's go to John in the state of Florida. Hello, John. Go ahead.
Hey, George, long-time listener. I started back with Art Bell.
Thank you, sir.
Good show, Sir Charles. Also, lots of interesting information. I wanted to tell you briefly about, there's a book called Spaceship Moon. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but it talks about this UFOs base that we have in Australia that we use to transport people up to the moon and to the base on Mars. And I think you had somebody on your show, George, a few months back that said he'd been on Mars for 17 years.
Yeah. A wild story.
Yeah, and it talks about the moon being a spaceship because there's records all over Earth about when it first appeared in the sky that refer to different things that happened before the moon was in the sky. So that's some pretty wild stuff. Apparently, we have UFOs that we use to transport people back and forth, probably reverse engineered or whatever. I think I've heard that the Nazis were experimenting with them back in the day. The other thing is, I was, a lot of your show, you talk about past lives and stuff, and we all have lived many, many millions of lives, and we've all been on other planets. And it's pretty interesting. When I met my wife, we realized we had been together before, and we felt like soulmates, but we didn't know where we had met before. And one day, I was in a counseling session, and I found out when we were together before, and I told her when I met her in the hall, I said, I found out when we were together before. And she said, "Oh, you got to tell me. I said, "I can't. You haven't been counseled on it yet. It could affect you." And she said, No, you got to tell me. And I stupidly said, "Okay." We were on this flying saucer as crew, and it got hit by a meteor, and everybody was killed.
Oh my gosh!
And she said, "Oh wow, that's amazing." I said, "Yeah." And so the next day, she called into work and said, "Oh, I can't come in today. I feel so bad.
I don't feel good.
My face is all swollen, and I feel terrible." And I said, "When did that start?" She said, "I don't know." Was it after I told you about that incident where we got killed on the spaceship? She said, "Yeah, it was." An hour later, she came into work and said, "Oh, I feel much better now. My face isn't swollen anymore."
I love that. Great story. We get all kinds of great stories here, Sir Charles.
Well, we do. We hear quite a few. One of the things I'd point out is that the moon creates mineral forms called tidal rhythmites. And we can go back literally a couple of billion years and see how the moon's gravity has affected the tides by these layering structures in the rock. And one of the things we've discovered is that early on in history, the Earth's day was really only about 8 to 10 hours long, depending on your interpretation of layers, and that the moon was much, much closer to the Earth back then, which is consistent with what we know of how it was formed. So tidal rhythmites will tell you a lot that the moon has been around for many billions of years. But,
why do you think we still have moon landing deniers?
Well, I think, boy, that's a great question. I've run into some people who didn't believe it at all, and working on the movie First Man, one of the people in the production office did not believe that we'd been to the moon. When they saw how difficult it was, the technology it took for us to duplicate the moonwalks just for the stunts and the microgravity scenes, he came to the realization that this stuff didn't exist back then. They couldn't have faked it without something astounding. And I think that kind of brought him around.
I knew Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, and I never had any doubts that we went to the moon. But after talking with him, you never have any doubts. He was quite a guy.
Oh, absolutely. I was able to meet and speak with Al Warden many times while we were on set during the shooting. And he was a fascinating fellow. We actually had a lot of common friends. I was working down in Orlando at the same time he was out at the Space Center. And he had a helicopter business in town then in Orlando.
Next up, let's go to Christian in the state of Tennessee. Hi, Christian. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Great.
George, and thank you for the guest. I got something on my wall I read all night. It's work on being more genuine in everything you do. Be positive, slow to speak, and think things through. Is there anything that your guests can tell us? We listen every night and everything that's genuine and true, that's sacred, that they can give us an answer to waking up in the morning and just knowing that we're part of this family and everything that y'all do. Any like little secret message? You know, we're all looking for something. But
we sure are. Any kinds of words of wisdom, Sir Charles?
I would have to say that if you believe that there is a God that created the universe, and I certainly do, then you have to be here for a reason. And so whether you consider yourself worth anything or not, you have worth in his eyes because he created you. To be thankful for every moment. If you can wake up with enough energy to complain, you're way ahead of the game. Just thank God for what you got. I do every day.
Were you raised spiritual, Sir Charles?
Not so much. I would say that I kind of had an innate sense of it. When I was 8, I read the Bible, and it had a great influence on me. And then I read Dante's Inferno, and that also had quite the influence. But over time I could see things that made more and more sense if you felt that there was some sort of sensibility behind it all. Could the universe, emerge out of nothing at random? It could. But, what's the chance of that? It's far smaller than if it were actually organized in some manner. And when you start and think about it, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense if your existence is simply to be here for a while and vanish,
What do you think of NASA's hearings on UAPs, as they call them? We call them UFOs. They always will be to us. And the testimony of some of these incredible military witnesses.
I would say that it probably is some sort of defense program we're not aware of to a large extent, because many years ago, some of the things we were working on would have been seen as, UAPs. And you can't really judge without hard data in hand. On the other hand, I often ask, why would somebody send a craft here when, if they've got that technology, they could just drop nanoparticles in the atmosphere and watch and listen to everything? We're to the point where we can make robots almost the size of a gnat. So if they're more advanced and have the ability to travel between the stars, why wouldn't they have far greater surveillance capabilities rather than putting themselves and their hardware at risk?
Interesting. What if they're all robots, though, coming here?
Now, it's a possibility. It's been stated that you could send out a robot that was meant to scout things out and build resources and then send them out like seeds cast to the sky. And after a while, they would make more copies and they'd cast them out. And if you were to do that, if you had an average speed of only 10% of the speed of light, in 100,000 years, your ships would be all over the galaxy. They'd be in every solar system. So it's not an unreasonable thought that there are probes that have been created by the races that have spread out to all the stars. And it's something that some people are actually looking for.
Michael in Florida, welcome to the program, Michael.
Hi, thanks, George. Always great when you have Sir Charles on.
Thank you.
I caught just I tuned in a little bit late tonight. I caught what you were saying about methane with petroleum and water. So it raises two questions in my mind, because George has mentioned about oil being possibly abiotic, or whatever how we call it. It's not fossil fuels. It's naturally from the ground. And so I was curious how you felt about that. And then also the second thing has to do with the environment. There's a big movement now with renewables, but I read that harvesting lithium does havoc to the environment, so maybe it's 6 of one, half dozen of the others, where we're getting diminishing returns. And I also heard that whatever efforts we have as far as being ecological minded, it really maybe makes 1% difference, because they're experts on both sides, and some will argue that everything this global warming thing is all. It's ridiculous. It's that it's really just cyclical, and nothing we're doing is having any effect. And others will say, no, we got to, watch the environment and do renewables and all of this stuff. So I was just curious what your thoughts are about that, because I know it's not your main focus, but I'm sure you have opinions on that.
Minute left, Sir Charles. Go for it.
All right, absolutely. Oil, abiotic, absolutely. It's formed from the methane that was present in the solar system when the planets formed. Some might be made biologically, but most of it's going to be from deep in the mantle. And as far as it goes, wow. I don't think we have enough time really to cover everything properly. I'm not even sure how to summarize. Yeah, there's just so much to say and so little time. But I want to say that we've had some pretty good questions tonight, and I appreciate them all.
Absolutely. And you keep in touch with us, all right?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure, George.
Sir Charles Shults III, website linked up at coasttocoastam.com, and do take a look at the anomalies from Mars in the highlight reel at coasttocoastam.com. Up next, Psychic Vince Jenna joins us. Wait till you hear what he has to say.
The Coast website is now conveniently optimized for mobile devices. If you're a Coast insider, you can listen to live and past shows right on your phone. Just visit coasttocoastam.com on your iPhone or Android browser.